each week of this series, we've taken a different commandment and unpacked it and applied the principles of the Ten Commandments to our lives. Because it's a reality that Colossians 3 tells us that Christ nailed the written code to the cross, and so we are not bound by the Old Testament laws, but the principles that we see that are kind of revealed to us in the Ten Commandments should still be applied in our lives today. And as we've walked through the first 5 so far, there's been a lot of, hopefully, conviction and encouragement to get dialed in and focused so that we can become the people that God has called us to be. And today we're going to cover the 6th commandment. So we're going to be in Exodus chapter 20, verse 13. It's just one verse. It's just 4 words. And here's what it says. You shall not murder. And you may be thinking, finally, a week where he's not going to talk to me. Because you're like, I've not murdered. I don't plan on murdering. Honey, I'm going to take a little nap. Wake me up for the baptism, okay? But here's the thing about it, is that when we look at you shall not murder, that's a good rule. It's a law. It's part of God's commandments. It should be obeyed. And you're like, yeah, but I don't have any trouble obeying this. Like, you talk about not misusing God's name and make sure I have no other gods. Like, I've got to do a lot of soul searching with those. But you shall not murder, like, I think I'm good to go. I think I would know if I violated that commandment. But the reality is that there's something deeper going on when God says, you shall not murder. And there's a principle that exists that eventually Jesus kind of unpacks for us in Matthew chapter 5. And I think in the application of the 6th commandment, there are 2 extremes to avoid. The first extreme is all taking of human life should be forbidden. There's never a justifiable reason to take a human life. Some people look at this commandment and they say, under no circumstances is killing allowed. But when you look at the commandment, it's you shall not murder. That's different than you shall not kill. And the Bible gives us exemptions or exceptions, if you will, not to murder, but when is the taking of human life actually allowed? And there are a lot of churches, a lot of denominations, and a lot of pastors that I love and respect that say, according to this commandment, there's never an exception. And there's never a footnote here that you need to look at. But when you look at the Bible, in the Old Testament, New Testament, doesn't matter. One example for this is self-defense. So Exodus chapter 22, verse 2, there's an example given. And these are just like hypothetical. If someone breaks into your house at night and there's a struggle and the perpetrator's life is taken, the defender is not guilty of bloodshed. In cases of self-defense, when the threat of life is brought upon you and you then match that level of threat, you are not guilty of violating the 6th commandment. So this includes protecting ourselves and our families. This protects police officers. It protects the men and women who operate within our armed forces. You shall not murder is not violated in cases of self-defense. Now, I mentioned there are some people that do not take this view. I have a Bible college professor that I listen to his lectures sometimes just to keep myself sharp. And I heard him teaching on the idea of self-defense. And he used the example, if someone breaks into my house at night, we have a plan. I'm going to tackle them to the ground, and my family's going to get out. And if I get murdered, my family is going to be able to forgive him on behalf of Jesus and hopefully lead him to Christ. That's his conviction. That's how he chooses to live. For me personally, if I had a daughter, I wouldn't want her to marry someone like that. Because love for your enemy should not look like hatred towards your family. And I get it. You're going to tackle someone to the ground and keep them from getting to your family. No offense to this guy. He's a great preacher, teacher, but I've seen this guy. I met this guy. I'm not a big guy. I'm not a strong guy. He's not tackling me to the ground and keeping me from doing anything. So if you have some lunatic, some maniac who's bigger and stronger and on something that breaks into your house, you have a moral responsibility to protect your family. So in matters of self-defense, you are not in violation of the sixth commandment. In cases of accidental death, Deuteronomy 19:5 gives the example that if you're out cutting down trees with your buddy and the axe head comes off and hits your buddy in the head and he dies, you're not to be held guilty for bloodshed in that instance either. In fact, in the Old Testament, they had different places. They're called cities of refuge, where you could go for a judge to hear your case to either condemn you to death or to let you off the hook after they heard all the evidence and any eyewitness testimony or anything like that. And so in cases of accidental death, you're not in violation of the sixth commandment. And then, believe it or not, execution. State-sponsored execution. In Genesis 9:6, here's what it says. And from each human being too, I will demand an accounting for the life of another human being. Whoever sheds human blood, by humans shall their blood be shed. For in the image of God, God has made mankind. When murder becomes an acceptable practice in society, it isn't held to the highest level of accountability. The society begins to break down in the worst possible ways. And so if you take the life of a human being, your life will be taken from you. And societies that actually practice this understanding of Genesis chapter 9 are societies that typically function better. Because what is really at stake is that each person is made in the image of God. This is why murder is such a big deal. We cannot fathom how precious each human life is to the Father. And how if we casually engage in hatred that leads to murder and the taking of a life, we are destroying individuals that are divine image bearers. God loves each person so much, He sent Jesus to die, to be buried, and raised on the third day, so that each and every person who's ever existed might have forgiveness of sins and be able to spend eternity with the Father. There is no other aspect of creation that will live forever in God's presence. Jesus came to die for all of humanity. And because of God's love for each person, the expectation for Christians, but just members generally in society, is that you will respect the life of your fellow man. But in our culture, there's been a shift that's taken place. And what the scientists or naturalists would say, that human beings are just like every other animal. And they use that term, every other animal, as if we're just a little bit more sophisticated than all the other mammals or aspects of creation. And whenever you reduce men and women created in the image of God to just like the animals, then you can have someone allowed to abort their baby, let's say, but then someone else goes to prison for, years and years for destroying a bald eagle's nest and killing their eggs. I think there's just something off about that. In the Western cultures and society, as we continue to become more intellectual and smarter than we can handle, we have given exceptions to murder on both the front end and the back end of life. So with abortion, they say, well, it's not a baby, it's a fetus. It's just a clump of cells. The problem is we're all clumps of cells. If you want to get down to the basic science of it. I just have more cells than a fetus. And to say it's just a fetus, not a baby, fetus is Latin for little person or baby. That's like, wait a minute, you weren't supposed to bring water into the movie theater. You get in trouble. It's not water, it's agua. I'm safe. This is okay. It's like, that's a difference without a distinction at this point. So unborn children, the moment at conception, have their own unique DNA. And Jeremiah says, before I formed you even in your mother's womb, I knew you. So a at conception, you have an individual who was created in the image of God, and that life should be protected. Now, people then throw in, well, what about cases where the mother's life is at stake or at jeopardy? We can have those conversations and try to figure out those nuances. But 99.9% of abortions are done for the sake of convenience. And that is an abomination before God and a violation of the sixth commandment. Now, our response as churches across America is not to stand on a soapbox and breathe down condemnation. It is to do our best to lead people to Jesus wherever they're at in that process, and to do our best to be loving, patient, and kind to oftentimes young women that are in a difficult situation trying to make decisions on their own. So this isn't an opportunity for us to look down our noses at individuals who are considering this or have done it. It's our opportunity to come alongside them and love them in the name of Jesus, to show them there's a different way to think and a different way to live. An abortion, though it's a violation of the sixth commandment, it is not the unforgivable sin, and God's grace extends to even that. On the back end of life, something that is apparently fairly popular in Canada is physician suicide. So that as you get to the end of your life, maybe your quality of life isn't what you hope it would be. A physician can help you transition from life to death. That's just a real grandiose, clean way of saying murder. Every person created in the image of God has a Lord and Savior, a God who's over them, a God who is perfect in all of his ways. Our days are numbered by him. And the logic of, well, you would put your dog down, so you would treat your dog more humanely than you would treat a relative. Once again, we're equating human beings and animals, which is not an equation that you can make. I will say that sometimes a parent or a grandparent at the end of their life may reject life-saving care. Or they may tell you, if I'm on tubes and ventilators and I'm being fed through machines, pull everything, let me pass in peace. There's nothing wrong with that. My dad, towards the end of his life, said, if I'm in a hospital bed hooked up to all this stuff, you pull the plug, you disconnect everything. I don't want to lay in a bed and live for however long the machines can keep me alive. Now you're extending the number of days when someone is trying to be called home by the Father. So I'm not saying that if you decide to not intervene medically when a person is passing, that you're in sin. You're not. They're naturally dying, and you're not trying to, through machines and through modern medicine, keep them alive for longer than what is necessary. And so there's a caveat with that, but it's a difficult thing. I get it. When you start talking about comfort care, and you start talking about the end of a person's life that you love and that you respect and that you hope the best for, those conversations are highly emotional. Those conversations are extremely difficult. But if at the heart of the issue, we're trying to uphold the sanctity of life and recognize people are made in the image of God, and we allow that to inform every single situation, we're going to be in the right place, the right state of mind, and make these decisions with a humble heart. So the sixth commandment doesn't cover every instance where a human life is taken, and we need to take those nuances to heart in our application. But even more than that, on the other end of the spectrum, when you look at the sixth commandment and its application, you shall not murder. Some people say, okay, well, as long as I don't take a person's life, I'm not in violation of the sixth commandment. I'm good to go. But what Jesus does for us in Matthew chapter 5, and he does it with different areas of teaching. You've heard it was said to the people long ago, and he says something. Keep your oaths, or talks about marriage and divorce. And in this case, he talks about murder. And he says, I need you to know the letter of the law and the spirit that was spoken behind the letter of the law to keep you within the realm of applying this commandment to your life in the right way. So Matthew chapter 5, beginning in verse 21, Jesus says, you have heard it was said to the people long ago, you shall not murder, and anyone who murders will be subject to judgment. But I tell you that anyone who is angry with a brother or sister will be subject to judgment. You're like, anyone who's angry? Well, that seems like a really difficult thing, because maybe you're not an angry person, but you work with some people that get you pretty daggum close to anger. And you're like, you're telling me I'm like guilty of murder anytime I'm angry with somebody? Applying it in context, though, and looking at the entire Bible, you remember in John 2 and at the end of the Synoptic Gospels where Jesus goes into the temple and he sees people buying and selling and ripping people off and turning the temple of God, which was supposed to be full of worship, into a marketplace, like into a Walmart? You know what Jesus does? You know what he does. He overturns the tables and the money changers, and he makes himself a whip. And he drives out the animals that are being sold. He drives out the people who are selling them. And if you were watching that scene, you would probably say, I think that Jesus guy's a bit angry at the moment. Because he was. It's righteous anger, though. If you have no emotional response when evil people do evil things to innocent people, that's a problem. So he's not saying that you can never be angry. There's a root to the anger, though, and it is hatred. He's saying, you think, as long as I don't murder, I'm not in violation of the sixth commandment. But what he's trying to unpack is, if you have hatred in your heart towards other people, then you are disobeying the spirit behind the sixth commandment. And when there's hatred in your heart, there are going to be actions that follow. Once the seed of hatred is planted, you get onto the spectrum. On one end of it, it is murder. But all throughout, there are ways that we try to hurt and harm the people around us because we have hatred in our heart towards them. It always leads to something. So the example Jesus gives is he says, again, anyone who says to a brother or sister, Raka, is answerable to the court. And anyone who says, you fool, will be in danger of the fire of hell. Raka is an Aramaic word that just means you're empty-headed, you're foolish. So if you act out in your hatred towards someone, Jesus says, you're going to suffer some consequences for this. You don't get to live a life of hatred and treat people in that spirit and think that there are going to be no consequences for your actions. Where you're like, well, why is fool such a big deal? And scholars don't exactly know, but all throughout the Old Testament, the book of Proverbs and Psalms in particular, the fool is a person who is far from God and seen as damned by God. And so if you call someone a fool, you are damning them to hell even when God has room for grace and love and compassion. That if you write someone off and just like, you're dead to me, I want nothing to do with you, you've closed things off with hatred in your heart that maybe God wants to have still open. Now, I see this in a lot of different ways. You see this too. Think about the anger and hatred that produces gossip about a person, or character assassination, or whenever you go out of your way to try to sabotage a person's life or their project at work or whatever it is. You wish them not success, but you wish that they fail, and you even go around and say things about them and try to do different things to make sure that they bomb or that they fail because I just can't stand them. Jesus would say there's no place in a Christian's heart for that type of mindset. I'll tell you where I see it play out is when I go to basketball games. So I'm in a basketball gym a lot. I don't mind that, by the way. And when you're at a high school game, that's a different level of competition. There's different things at stake. When you back it all the way down to like, now we're watching 3rd and 4th graders, they're 8-year-old kids. I don't care as much, okay? Like when I was in high school, I remember a lot of my games, but like when I was in Pee Wee, I don't remember very much. We were undefeated, I do remember that. But other than, whatever, I don't know. So the thing is, and here's what frustrates me. When parents are at games yelling at and cheering against other 8-year-olds, I'm like, he's an 8-year-old kid. She's an 8-year-old kid. Surely, like, we're not, and then the kid makes a mistake or whatever, they get a foul. Yeah, and I'm like, just come, what are you doing? The kids are out there. They're not supposed to be in the stands, too. We're supposed to be adults here. And then, we're yelling at referees, and I get it. Sometimes referees make bad calls. Why? Because they're human beings. And sometimes basketball games can start to get out of hand. So it's like, okay, we're yelling at this kid. I don't care if it's a high school kid, and a 17-year-old kid we're talking about now. He is still a kid. And like, I remember going to a St. Louis Cardinals baseball game. Luis Gonzalez was in the outfield. He played for the Diamondbacks. And he was running in to catch a ball, and he collided with one of his teammates. And all the Cardinals fans went, ooh. But then we saw he drop the ball, and everyone went, yeah! Now, he tore up his shoulder on that play, got dislocated. Now, on one hand, it's like, you get paid millions of dollars. You'll be fine. You'll be okay, right? Not that big a deal. But then, I've been at a game, a junior high game, where a kid broke his wrist, made a foul, and it was the nastiest thing I've seen in my life. He held up his arm, and it was hanging in 2 places. And I was just like, oh my goodness. It's like, that's why I could never be a doctor. I can't get close to that kid right now. I couldn't touch it, look at it. I'm just like, I got to be somewhere else right now. Lord, transport me somewhere else. This is too much for me. And I heard fans, I don't think cheering that he got injured, but not aware, and they're just clapping, yeah, yeah, yeah. I thought, y'all need to settle down. So there's something in us, if we're not careful, that starts as hatred and can become so much more that Jesus wants us to be mindful of and to tamper down. And if we allow that hatred to exist and determine how we talk to people and talk about people and treat others, we are moving into violation of the 6th commandment, you shall not murder. Now, here's what John does. John was one of Jesus' apostles, and in 1 John chapter 3, I'm going to cover this quickly. He not only makes the application that it's not about doing bad things, but you've also got to be in a place of mind where you're doing good things as well. So 1 John 3:15, he says, anyone who hates a brother or sister is a murderer. And you know that no murderer has eternal life residing in them. Okay, so hatred towards your brother or sister is in violation of the 6th commandment. You hate, you're a murderer. And you're like, okay, that means I just won't do bad things. I'll take advice from the book of Thumper, chapter 2, verse 12. If you can't say nothing nice, don't say anything at all, right? So that's going to be my mantra. I can't say anything nice in this moment, so I just won't say anything at all, and then I'm not in violation of breaking the 6th commandment. But then, John goes on to define hatred for us, not by unpacking that idea, but transitioning to talking about love. And what he says to us is, you may say, I'm not acting in a hateful manner, but if you're not acting in a loving manner, by default, you're acting in hatred. There is no neutral ground here. Can't say nothing nice, won't say anything at all. That gives you a win in the moment, but if you allow hatred to exist and you aren't doing good for people, then by the habit of your life, you are living in hate. So he says, you can't hate. Well, what's hate? I'm not going to tell you about hate. Let's talk about love. This is how we know what love is. This is how you're supposed to live. And if you want to live a life that's absent of hate, it has to be present of love. Jesus Christ laid down his life for us. And we ought to lay down our lives for our brothers and sisters. If anyone has material possessions and sees a brother or sister in need, but has no pity on them, how can the love of God be in that person? Dear children, let us not love with words or speech, but with actions and in truth. The love of God cannot be in a person if you see someone in need, you see someone that you can help, and you live in apathy towards that situation. Well, if you don't have the love of God present, what do you have in its place? You have hatred. So he says, the example he uses, if you see someone that has a need, and you can meet the need, but you refuse to take pity on them, you refuse to put yourself in their shoes, you refuse to love them and treat them the way you would want to be treated, there's no love in that. By not extending a hand and not offering help, you didn't say anything bad about them. Kudos to you. You kept your mouth shut. Great job. But if you don't actually love with actions and in truth, if you don't actually do something about it, you're not acting in love, you're acting in hate. Now, the example he gives, material possessions, you see that they need something, you've got it, you refuse to give it to them. I will say that there's a little caveat. Their culture and ours are different. Paul does say in his writings, if you're not willing to work, you shouldn't be able to eat. He says, what we talked about last week with honor your parents. Anyone who does not provide for the needs of his family, especially those in his immediate household, he has denied the faith and is worse than an unbeliever. There's no place for laziness and a lack of work ethic in the Christian movement. And sometimes instead of giving, you need to hold someone accountable in a loving way. Because at some point, you can give, but your resources, or even like the church's resources, they're going to be depleted. But I don't think it's difficult for us to create a scenario or a circumstance where a person, though they have done the right things and though they're responsible and they work hard, they've fallen on difficult times by circumstances no fault of their own. Whether that be the loss of a job, the downsizing of a company, a sickness that's come in with extra expenses. And the job of the church isn't to look and go, oh, that's rough. I'm glad that's not me and my family. The job of the church is to rally around our brother or sister and look for opportunities to serve and to love. Not with words or speech. I love you, hope you get better. But with actions and in truth. Love, it is not an emotion, it is not a feeling, it is a verb, it is something that we do. Now, one of the things that we talk a lot about at our church is love one. You don't have the time, the energy, or the money to help every person that needs help in your life. But you can love one. There can be one family that you invest in. There can be one person that you help, that you serve, that you invite to church, that you're in constant prayer for. You can't do it for everybody, but you can do it for one. And you need to be doing it for someone. This is what love looks like. And I will say that if we want to keep ourselves from falling into the trap where hatred becomes our default emotion or where our soul naturally is, we have to pivot away from that and look for opportunities to love people and to love them well and to love them intentionally. Here's my challenge to you. I want you to evaluate your heart this week. Is there a type of person that just really gets under your skin? A type of person that whenever you see them or you see their posts on Facebook, you just go, ugh, can't stand that. Maybe it's a Republican. Maybe it's a Democrat. and you see those political posts, well, they don't know what this, they're just drinking the Kool-Aid. I can't believe them. They listen to Fox News, or they watch MSNBC and rah, rah, rah. And immediately, a person comes in with either Make America Great Again or a Kamala Harris t-shirt or whatever, and you look at them and you go, And you got hatred before you've even said a word to them. That's a problem, right? Is there a type of person that causes those emotions to be riled up within you? Is there a specific person? Maybe you work with them. Maybe you're related to them. Maybe they're a parent at your kid's school that they just drive you bananas. And you're like, yeah, but I have valid reasons for them to drive me. I mean, you should know, and they always say, and they never do, and I get it. They're an imperfect person. They're the only one in your life who's imperfect. I get it. Now listen, don't make yourself a doormat. Don't let yourself be taken advantage of. I'm not advocating for that. You protect yourself, protect your family, use wisdom, common sense, good judgment. But make sure that you don't have hatred in your heart for them. And then finally, think about people in your life that you could be helping, that you could be loving well on behalf of King Jesus. You can't love everyone well, but you can love one. Who might God be placing on your heart to sacrificially love and to walk through life with? This is the pattern that he wants to see his church engaged with. These are the people that he wants us to be. So let's work together at becoming these people.